Welcome back to another episode of Survival Worldwide on Reality Pop. I'm your host, Chris Swanepoel, and with me today, back again from Nowhere Land. I missed them on the weekend, my fellow duo, the Cara to my George, Riley. Riley, how are you? And I'm not voting you out tonight, don't worry. I did like Amanda on the weekend, but I haven't decided to turn on you as of yet.
Yeah, I'm doing well, thanks, Chris. I'm wearing my black today in honor of the Duchess of Double Bay, mourning her loss in Survivor. It's been such a great end game this week. Obviously, 2 episodes, so not as much to discuss about. But going into next week, it's going to be really, really exciting because either Hayley or George, they're going to have to abdicate the throne at one point, and we are so close now to crowning the winner of Australian Survivor, Brawns vs. Brawn, the 6th member to join the esteemed company of our former Australian Survivor winners. I'm really excited. It's going to be a massive week ahead and really looking forward to discuss this all with you tonight.
100%. Now, before we get into everything this episode, I already sent out a video earlier this week on Instagram, Twitter, wherever you guys are following us on, to say thank you very much to every single person that has been listening to this podcast and any of the other content that we are currently doing on Reality Pop. There's some great stuff happening in the near future. Some of it Riley will be very involved with as well, and we'll get him to plug that towards the end of the podcast. But, we just want to thank everybody that listens to this podcast week in and week out, and we've had some really great live crowds that have been listening to this as well and that are getting involved, and we constantly see new people popping up, and we want to thank you for sticking with us as we continue to grow this channel. We've just hit 1,000 subscribers, which is the first really major sort of milestones that we're very proud to achieve. And also welcome here in the chat, Go Dave 89. It's the first time, Go Dave, that I see you in the live chat, so welcome to the show. And he says that he's really hyped for the final 3, and we will definitely get into that. I think that the end game, Riley, I was sort of a couple of weeks ago, I was starting to get a bit low on the season, overkill of twists, a lot of people being saved, editing was a bit weird, but you've got to admit, as things get to the end here, you kind of understand why we've been focusing so much on the players that we have been focusing on throughout the whole season, because those players are all still in the game here at Final 5. When we look at, George, Way, Cara, maybe Way, we could talk about her edit a little bit, but definitely Cara, definitely Hayley. All those people have been getting a reasonably good edit throughout the season. And in this episode, the first episode of the week, we have Way sort of ready to make a move and take control of the game here. And she really wants to turn against George, and she wants to get Hayley and Flick to work with her to turn against George, because we know Cara probably is not going to do it. That duo has been pretty tight from day one. But what we find out ultimately in this first episode is that Flick is not telling anybody that she's got an idol, which really limits the ability for Flick to try and force people to make certain moves and things like that. She's really bargaining on that element of surprise, and she really just doesn't trust anyone.
Yeah, absolutely. But I still like that she kept the surprise a little bit, and it played out very well in the end. Obviously, George and Cara combining to get rid of Way at this point in the game. But, hats off to George for fighting this long. I know I've spoken so poorly of him throughout the season, even before the season.
Shame on you.
Critical of him. And look, George has made me eat my own words at this point. He's almost in the final 3, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what happens. And Alex Neo here saying he's really hoping the final 2 is George versus Hayley, and wouldn't that be a great outcome? Obviously, George has been the king from day one in this season, and Hayley, of course, being the queen, she may have been voted out earlier in the season, but you can't doubt that she's played a great game up until this point.
Now, Riley, Alex, by the way, welcome to the live stream. We love having new people on the channel here with us as well. Now, Riley, you've been resisting this the whole year or the whole season every time I ask you this, but have you changed your mind on George so much that you would vote for him to become the future Prime Minister of Australia? And do you think that this is going to set up his political career moving forward now that he's got so much fans over in Australia?
We don't get too much into politics here on the channel. I think this is strictly reserved for Survivor and discussing that. But I have heard some whispers, and I don't know whether it's just media speculation trying to get clicks on articles, that George may be running for the New South Wales Parliament in the future. So, George, if you're watching, I wish you the best of luck. I'm not in the Bankstown area, so I can't necessarily vote for you, but best of luck to him. And yeah, he's proven to be such a fun character, and really his back has been against the wall from day one. And now we're at day 47 coming up to it now, and he's still alive in the game, still fighting, which is just great to see.
Now, just quickly want to acknowledge a couple of people here in the live chat. Marcus, welcome back to the stream, saying congratulations on 1,000 subscribers. Thank you very much, Marcus. Harry Wiggins, Survivor South Africa alumni, also here in the chat tonight, and is saying that 2,000 subscribers is next. Thanks, Harry. We always appreciate your support as well. Jenny, welcome back to the live stream. And Jenny says, another 211 vote on Survivor Australia. Oh my God, Hayley Queen. And we will definitely get into that. I want to talk about that more in the second part of this episode. Anthony also back saying, hello, my dudes. Hayley stays queen. And GoDave says, yes, crazy 2-1-1 split there in the second episode. And Jenny, thank you very much for that. You know, we really appreciate all of the support. And Channel Mud, welcome back to the stream as well. For those who don't know who Channel Mud is, he does have his own channel of Minecraft Survivor, and they do really cool sort of video content on Minecraft Survivor as well. So go check that out on YouTube as well. Now, Riley, you know, I came into this week thinking, and we're going to stay on George here for a little bit, because how he has managed to get to 3 people left in the game and still be there absolutely blew my mind. I think I was convinced last week when me and you talked, I said, I know the end game. George has gone next. You know, Flick's got an idol. It's probably going to be George next. And I just didn't think he was going to get past 5. But he is so good with the numbers here. He realizes that if Flick potentially has an idol, he could be voted out. So he gets what he does the whole season. And for people out there who don't think that George has really run the strategy this season, I don't know what show they're watching, because he's constantly gone off with Cara. And he's created these rogue plans that only him and Cara is in on. And they've played this middle. And again, even at the final 5, they're going to play the middle here, where Hayley and Way is going to vote one way, but Cara and George is going to vote another. And it all comes down to, you know, George again working harder than other people, following Flick around and noticing that Flick is way too calm sitting instead of looking for an idol. So he kind of gets the drift that something may happen. And Cara, she's not even at that level. She's thinking there's just no way Hayley's got Flick's got an idol. Great play here by George. And I tell you what, if he's not a politician, if he doesn't become the prime minister of the country, then he should be an accountant, because he does know how to work with the numbers.
Absolutely. Yeah, just a great, very perceptive by George to recognize that Flick was sitting there on the banks of the river, you know, not looking for an idol. Obviously, George has a lot of experience in finding idols and having those advantages, having his back against the wall and then pulling out an idol by surprise and, you know, blindsiding someone. But, you know, certainly for him to come up with an alternate plan at this stage in the game, and take that risk really at not casting those votes towards Flick, whereas had it forced a tie potentially, Flick would have remained in the game. Obviously, we know Flick still in the final 3 now, and she remains a big jury threat. But certainly at that point, you know, it would have been the better move, I think. But, you know, certainly George and Cara have been 2 very tight peas in a pod, really ever since the early Brawns camp, and to see them continuing throughout this final 4 is really great to see, and a great plan again from George to flip that vote against Way and take control of the numbers.
I'd also want to talk about the Way-George relationship, right? Because obviously it comes to an ultimate end here. George saved Way very early on in the season and right in the beginning, and it felt like for the longest period of time, Way had some sort of a resentment towards George for saving her, because she felt like she was obligated and that George made her feel obligated to work with her at times when she didn't want to. And we see a lot of that relationship between George and Way where, you know, Cara kind of has to be like the mediator at times, telling George, back off a little bit on Way, give her an opportunity to speak her mind. She calls George a bit of a bully at the beginning of this episode and says that he thinks he's someone that's out there to help the weak and that, but she doesn't see it that way. And it's really interesting because at the end of it, when they go into the immunity challenge here, I've never seen this before where it's an individual immunity challenge, but George stops what he's doing and he goes back to help Way. Like he says to JLP at the end, he saw a friend really struggling and he wanted to help them, even if it took just 10 seconds out of his time to help her get across that beam. And some people might say that's the politician in him and that he's sort of trying to get jury votes here. I personally prefer to believe that George in his soul is a very good guy and he's sometimes misunderstood. And I think that him going there to help Way, I probably somewhere, like maybe there is some, I mean, he's a smart guy. Maybe there is some strategy where he's thinking, I will want to get some votes, but I choose to believe that it had to do a lot with him actually really caring for Way, because he has cared for Way and he's had a soft spot for her throughout the whole season. What was your sort of feelings about that specific move there by George in this episode?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, as he said, it took 30 seconds out of his time to, help Way across the beam there. But certainly it's great to see that that relationship has really stood the test of time ever since that first tribal council there. Obviously, Way has, as you said, felt a little bit of resentment toward George throughout the season, but George hasn't really let that get in the way. He's still left an open book for Way to come and work with him. Obviously, Way working with him last week, and Hayley as well, in terms of flipping the brawn, getting rid of Andrew and Danny this last week. But certainly, great to see the tribe come together, really. George, offering the olive branch to Way, helping her out to, remain in the challenge. It has gone both ways, though, obviously. Last week we saw in that challenge where there was the vertical beam and George was reluctant to jump off it. Way suggesting to George time and time again, you can make that jump, you can do it. Really nice to see that level of camaraderie and this bond being built between these casts. It's always great seeing the cast, put down their swords at times and really come together as a tribe and show that love, share that love around. It's great to see.
Yeah. Now, I also want to touch on Hayley's gameplay for this specific round. She has a conversation here with George prior to the immunity challenge where they talk about potentially working together here going towards the end game. And obviously, I think that conversation also saves Hayley to a certain amount because George is a very smart, analytical player. He does try and I do think he's quite successful at putting his emotions aside and making, and we definitely see it in the second episode, making the best potential move for his own game to get ahead and get to the end here. And Hayley brings up that, she is more than happy to play with him towards the end of the game here and that it will be dancing with the devil going into the end. But George is really confident he's going to win. Hayley doesn't know if that's so true. She thinks she's got a really good shot at actually beating George if she does get to the final. And obviously we're going to see this play out for quite a while because, Way being the person here that George and Cara ultimately target, I think Hayley's got a lot to do with it because she's showing a willingness and an openness in this episode to work with George moving forward in the game, which makes George not look at her as the person that he needs to get rid of. And he's very aware that Way has been resistant to him at times and hasn't really wanted to play. She doesn't want to play ball with him at times.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think George is right here in saying that, Hayley is his best chance to verse in the final tribal council because they're the two big game players. And you can't criticize either one of them for playing a big game when, both have betrayed just as many people on the jury. But certainly, George obviously keeping an open book and Way wanting to make this move against George, obviously not working out for her in the end because George has this counter plan to go against her. But really perceptive, I think, on all the players' levels, maybe with the exception of Flick for not, revealing that game, revealing the idol and using it as leverage to work with someone like a Hayley in a way to get rid of George. But on all levels, I think they're really starting to think towards the end game now that I need to figure out what my path to the final tribal council is. Do I want to go against someone like Flick, who obviously has the Brawns on the jury? But then again, there's these major threats in the game, like George, who's played such a strong game so far. Cara and Way haven't really pissed anyone off and they've been fighting from the bottom from day one. So what is the best option to get to the end?
100%. Anthony here says that conversation between Hayley and George kind of reminded him on the Sandra, but I don't know about that. And I also thought about that. And also at the same time, a Natalie White type of like, hey, Russell thinks that he's going to carry me to the end, but I don't know if he's actually going to win. I might win here. Not saying that Hayley is a Natalie White because, she's probably done, not probably, she has done a lot more than Natalie White in regards to sort of pushing the strategy and sort of playing a very high paced game and not being afraid to make certain moves. Not that I'm saying I don't even want to get into the whole, Natalie White, is she a good winner or not conversation, because I do believe ultimately if you win the game, you deserve to win the game. But there'll be some interesting things we'll talk about at the end of this because I think that a George Hayley final two is possible, but we'll definitely get into that towards the end of this podcast. I don't want to jump straight into it immediately. I also want to talk about sort of, if you look at Way's game here, she goes out, Riley, in this episode, trying to make a move here against George. Where do you think Way went wrong? Like, what could she have done differently to prevent going out in this spot? For me personally, I feel like the point where she got outplayed by George in voting out Andrew, she probably lost quite a lot of her strategic ability or her social capital within the game, because it does sound to me like she was like, we didn't really see much of that relationship, but it sounded like her and Andrew were really close. And if you've got a very very tight two in the game, I think you should go out of your way to try and save that person for as long as you can, like George and Cara did for each other many a times until it wasn't feasible for them to save each other at this last move in the second episode.
Yeah, I think so. And we saw that moment when Andrew and Wei had the immunity necklace on the Brawn tribes. They were obviously bonded from that point, being two of the only members of the Brawn tribe alongside Hayley. And there was someone else who I'm forgetting right now. I think it was Baden, actually. But certainly, yeah, Wei and Andrew did seem to have that bond. But, Wei obviously voting out Andrew. I think at that point, Wei really had to consider who she wanted to go to the end with. I think she would have preferred to go to the end with the Brains and the likes of Cara and Hayley, because she probably saw those people as being someone she had a better chance of beating at the end, as opposed to going with Brawns. While we did see Danny and Andrew reach out to Wei, and they had somewhat of a close bond. Certainly, I think Wei recognized her best chance was to be with the Brains at the end, but I think it may have worked against her. And for me, I think the thing that worked against her was probably still sticking with George on that last Danny vote. Had she potentially struck a little bit earlier, gotten George or Cara out of the game at that point, she then could have gone back and worked with Cara if the bridges weren't completely burnt. It's really hard to say where Wei went wrong. Lots of W's in that sentence there, but she's played a great game throughout the season, a great social game, and great to see her win that individual immunity last week as well. Coming from the bottom, from being the first person nearly to be voted out. The only reason she was saved was because George played that pass and ultimately Phil went home. To make it all the way to the final five is a massive accolade for Wei, to see her go all this way.
Oh, 100%. She just couldn't find a way to the end, at the end there. But basically, if you look at it, Riley, if we look at the season, it was Brains versus Brawn. We've said this a few times on this podcast. Maybe Wei was disadvantaged by the fact that there was only one real puzzle challenge that she ended up absolutely smashing. She showed everyone she was that much better than people putting words together and doing puzzles. I feel like if there was more of a balance in the type of challenges that we see after the merge here, especially in the season with Brains versus Brawns, where one part of the season is literally Brains, you need to give them something to balance it out and equal the playing fields here. But then in hindsight, you could also say, we've got a final five here with 4 Brains having made it to the end and only 1 Brawn. So somehow it still worked out in the Brains' advantage. And obviously, a player like George here, who knows he's not good at winning challenges, he's finding other ways to get ahead. If Wei's not that way, he'll find another way to get to the end.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something we'll see come up in this next episode, where George is really considering, do Flick or Hayley end up winning immunity? Who is going to be the best option to get out at this point in the game, as someone that can potentially beat, a Flick at the final 3, and then they can take me to the end and we can get Flick out then. Is it a good idea to strike against Cara now and then keep Hayley in the game, because Hayley actually has a chance of beating Flick, because we've seen Hayley win individual immunity multiple times. I think the challenges post-merge have been quite even. This last immunity challenge that Hayley won with the beam and then crossing and stacking the little bricks and pushing them along, unlocking the key and then doing the puzzle, I thought that was quite balanced. Obviously, I think Wei lost a lot of the lead in the beam at the start, but certainly that's a challenge that really anyone can win at that point. Not to speak poorly of Wei, but I don't think it was overly difficult in the Brawn phase of the game. It was, relatively easy to straddle across that beam upside down, and then hop off and stack the dominoes there. Certainly, I feel the immunity challenges have been quite well balanced, and I mean, massive props. I love seeing these, 4 stages of the challenges, and seeing these really long challenges with all different skill sets in the end. It makes it a lot entertaining, and you can see, massive comebacks like Wei did last week, how she was out of it and then came back in the end, and within 5 seconds got the word puzzle just like that.
Yeah, I also want to talk here about Flick, because we've spoken a bit about the other 3 here being Wei, George, and Hayley. Flick, ultimately, she doesn't win this one, but she gets to play an idol, which she's got. And again, guys, for you out there that are saying that production has completely unbiasedly given this game to George, or try to get George to the end, why would they allow for Flick to get this last idol, if that is true? Think about that. Let it sink in. This game is, and I saw David, the Golden God, go off on a few fans about that as well, saying, obviously it looks like, it's that way because the camera people follow the person that is closest to the idol, but they don't make it obvious. They don't plant it there for specific people. I don't think Flick getting that idol, if they really wanted George to get to the end, was the way that they get George to the end, because if Flick didn't have the idol here, she would have been voted out, and I think that George would have kept both Way and Cara. The only reason that George isn't going against Hayley here is because he knows he needs his own Frankenstein monster that can take out the beast that is Flick here at the end. He needs that person. So Way is collateral damage because of that. And that's why I do appreciate George, because he's adaptable, he's flexible, he moves with the twists and things. And if it's not working in his favor, he'll find a way to keep himself in the game. Now, with this, Flick has got this idol. She plays it. She's safe in the game. She gets to the next round. She wins immunity, Riley. What a way to win immunity from the back. Clutch, because Hayley dominated throughout that whole challenge. But it really shows you why you should never, ever, ever give up in an immunity challenge. And, George has been guilty of sitting out of challenges and things like that in the past, but this shows you why you should never, ever sit out of a challenge, and you should fight to the very bitter end, which she does. She comes from behind, she wins it, and I don't know how you felt. I was pretty emotional when she won that, and she said she was doing this for her mother, and her storyline is really starting to get to me. Like, I would not be angry at a Flick win. I don't think she gets there, and we'll talk about that, but if she won, I feel like, hats off to her for fighting when something as big, happened like it happened in her life while she was out there playing a game such as Survivor. Why would you not want to root for the underdog at this stage with such a great story?
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny that you mentioned the word underdog there, because Flick obviously came into the game as a brawn, as one of the favorites to win. They were really the champions, and the Brains were the contenders at that point in the game. But Flick has had such a great story arc, I think. Seeing all that's happened on the island. Obviously, she lost her mum while she was on the island, had the courage and bravery to continue playing and continue fighting for her family, which I think, is just so great to see that she's never giving up. And you talk about the challenges, not giving up in the game and continuing to fight despite the adversity she's facing at home, and, really proving to everyone that she is extremely strong. I have to give a massive hats off to Cara in that challenge as well. Cara was extremely close as well. I think she was second to Hayley in terms of getting to the ball toss. And then obviously in the end, Flick just absolutely steamrolled her and just narrowly beat Hayley, who obviously got out to an insurmountable lead. But Cara as well, right in there. I mean, people don't talk about her as being someone that competes in the challenges, but from what I understand, she's been, not the greatest, but she's certainly given it her all and been quite.
She's never quit. I've never seen her quit. I've never ever seen her quit in any of those challenges. So hats off to Cara. And one of the things, talking about Cara this episode, George says that Cara, obviously, they've been close, and we see the relationship between them with Cara going up there, scaring him in the hammock. Really, really funny scene there with the two. And in my opinion, I made the claim last week, and I think I annoyed you and a couple of other fans by saying, are they the biggest and the best duo ever to exist in Australian Survivor? For me, they're up there. They're definitely up in the conversation of, definitely most fun duos to ever watch play the game, because they've saved each other so many times in the game, and it's been true loyalty between those two. But, Cara here, we learned that she really put a lot of effort into preparing to coming out here and playing Survivor, which makes it even more shocking that she's had some of those, idle misplays or, placing a vote wrong somewhere, which I'd love, Cara, if you ever listen to this, I'd love to have you on the show to talk about that, because I'm sure there's a whole story behind what happened. And, Cara here, she's trying to teach George how to make fire. How funny was that scene? And George, I think this was the point where George realized, listen, if it's going to come down to my ability to make fire, I'm screwed. I'm not going to stay in the game. I've got to think of another plan.
It was such a hilarious moment, seeing Cara say to George, this is how you make fire, and her completely fail. As Anthony says there, Cara is so unintentionally iconic. And I do think Cara has been such an underappreciated character this season. Yes. But I've really grown to love her throughout the season. She's just grown so much as a character, obviously being perceived as one of the weaker Brains early on. And she was, the second last woman standing on the Brains tribe. She was voted out, came onto the Brawns tribe, voted out by playing her idol selflessly for her closest ally in the game, which again speaks to how close that alliance was. And she's continuing to fight all the way until the Final Four. It's so great to see. We talk about the robbed goddesses that go out at the Final Four of Survivor, and I truly think Cara is certainly up there as a great castaway. But back to your point, seeing Cara and George, start to teach each other how to make fire. Obviously, Cara failing to scrap the magnesium, but then George quickly picking up on it. Cara obviously saying, I loosened the jar for you a little bit there. Great to see. Obviously, it won't come into play at the end in terms of making the fire, but certainly great for George to start getting that experience and prepare to start making fire because it might come in need.
Yeah. Anthony here asked, would anyone else watch a Cara cooking show called I Think I've Cooked This? I would, especially if Yaya is a part of the panel there when they're making the food. It needs to be Yaya's kitchen where they're making this show, and I would definitely be watching that for sure. Harry Wiggins here in the chat also says, if George wins, I think this will be evidence that it is possible to win Survivor without wearing an immunity necklace. Remember, Pierre was the winner who won individual immunity once. And it would be for Australian Survivor, but I think that Sandra for the US never won any immunities in either one of her seasons.
Tommy Sheehan, Tina Wesson, Natalie White. There's many in US Survivor, but at least for Australian Survivor, obviously having a much bigger merge of 13 people usually, and oftentimes having multiple people win individual immunity at one stage. Like we saw 4 people have individual immunity earlier in the season, but certainly it is possible to win the game without holding an immunity necklace. And it's actually surprising that George hasn't won a challenge so far. He's had almost every other immunity from Tribal Council except for winning an individual immunity challenge. But certainly, as we said time and time again, George is the ultimate battler. And we talked a lot about Harry Hills in our Champions First Contenders 2 rewatch.
Yeah, the cockroach.
Last year as being the cockroach and fighting from the bottom. But I think George has really one-upped Harry here and is, continued to fight from the bottom. He's been beaten down so many times, but he's continued to just keep crawling and crawling and crawling. And here it is. And he hasn't had much resistance in the merge phase of the game. He's almost seemed to, that there hasn't been as much resistance against him, whereas in the pre-merge, it seemed every Tribal Council, everyone was wanting George out, whereas here, he's almost gone unscared for a lot of it, obviously rallying the numbers in recent Tribal Councils, but, great to see he's still fighting.
No, 100%. And one of the things for me with George's game, when we look at this, and we're going to analyze the hell out of George's game, Hayley's game, because I really, in my gut, I feel it's going to be a George and Hayley final 2. And we will talk about that in a few seconds. I know we're teasing everybody. Yeah, I know we're teasing everybody in the live stream, but we'll definitely get to it. But what I really am thinking is quite impressive, Riley, is that let's remember George played a ridiculous advantage at the very first Tribal Council in a season that's 50 days long. He played an idol somewhere like 3 or 4 votes in. He played an idol, to save someone. He's done so many crazy things pre-merge. He's played a bombastic game. A game that you look at and you think this game in Australian Survivor should not get you to final 3. There's no way this game gets you to final 3. I know you were low on him at points for a very short period. You keep apologizing for what you said pre-merge. You've been with me on sort of really admiring his game since the merge. But at the end of the day, I don't think any of us thought he would get to the final 3, and it's not taking away anything from Hayley. I know we talk about George here a lot, and we're very excited about George. But if Hayley makes it to the final, her game, we have to analyze that as well, because yes, she does come back. Yes, she does get voted out. But like I said in previous podcasts, to be able to go from being voted out, knowing everybody is against you, it's the easiest thing in the world for everybody to put your name back down because they've already done it once. So you've got to do a lot right to be able to work your way back into certain groups and to be able to get to where you are now. And she's suddenly becoming a challenge beast here. And in this specific episode, Flick wakes up and she looks at Hayley and she's like, hey, my biggest competition going into the next round is actually not George. It's actually not Cara. I can beat both of those and I can take whoever I want to the final. But Hayley is the person. She's good at endurance. She could potentially beat me at the end here. And I might not even make the final 2. So she turns her target on George here, which I think is the correct move from Flick. But Hayley one-ups her on this when she finds out from Cara that she is being targeted. And she does something here that none of us thought was possible. She breaks up the duo of Cara and George. And I think that is going to be her pitch at the final. She's got the scalp of Joey. She's got the scalp of Simon, because she really outplayed Danny there. She can claim that move. And she's now got the scalp of Cara, who's part of George's alliance. And she's allowed for George to take all of the hits and be at the front while she's played at the back. I think this is going to be her final pitch.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a great move. And certainly when it comes to the end, it will be, almost her crowning moment, it seems. We've got Andrew and Danny as well. Hayley played a pivotal role in those people being voted out. So she certainly, as you say, since she returned to the game, she has played a very different game. And, it may not be as dominant on screen as it was earlier before she was voted out. But certainly it's been a very under the radar game, but no less dominating game. She has played a pivotal role in basically every vote. And, credit to her for splitting George and Cara up, creating fractures in that alliance and recognizing that, those two don't have the best chance against each other, and that one of them needs to go. It's a great move to break up an unbreakable alliance. And we saw how strong that alliance has been throughout the season. George playing an idol for uh, Cara and Cara playing an idol for George. Cara voting herself out in that instance.
Yes.
To break up such a strong alliance is just unbelievable to see. So props to Hayley for that.
Yeah, and also the right move here by Hayley, because if you think about it, I think that Cara is a lot more likable by the jury. Like, yes, she stuffed up. Yes, she caused, Big D to be voted out earlier, in the season. But ultimately, I think that the fact that she's an empath, the fact that she gets along with people so well, she builds those social relationships. She was the bridge between. She was the Trish to George's Tony in the season at times. I really think that she's got the social connections here to go to the final and potentially steal votes away from Hayley. I think she made the right decision, because ultimately Hayley was the one here who could make the decision of who was going to go home, because she could have chosen to vote against George if she wanted with Cara. And hats off to Cara for not playing with her emotions here and doing the thing that she should be doing. She should be aiming to take out who, in her mind, is the best player to ever play Survivor. Do you think he's up there? Do you think he's the best player ever? Like, where do we put George at this stage?
Yeah, and this is the interesting thing to discuss, and we'll go into this when we discuss, what potential final two scenarios we have. But certainly, I think if Hayley or Flick win, George has to be spoken as being perhaps one of the best losers in Survivor. I'd say Luke Turkey in Champions vs Contenders 2 is definitely up there as well.
Yeah.
And there are, I'd even put Sean Combs up there as being someone that's played a great losing game. There certainly have been a lot of great losers in Australian Survivor. Losers sounds harsh, but non-winners in Australian.
There's only one winner.
But certainly, George has played a great game, and we've said it time and time again, not only in this podcast but throughout the whole season, that George, he's always been in the chopping block ever since episode 1. He should have been the one that went home really early on in the game. After Phil went home, he should have been the next target on the Brawns tribe. But he's continued to survive, and it's just, it still baffles me that he's still in the game. I mean, I was saying he was going to be the next one to go, the next one to go, the next one to go for like 10 tribal councils in a row. And the amount of times he's proven me wrong at this point, I really think George has a chance of winning if it gets to the end. It baffles me just how he's been able to survive all this time.
100%. Now, I have put a poll on in the beginning of this live stream to say, will we see a Hayley and George final 2? And 77% of our live viewers tonight, there's 13 votes so far, has said yes, it will be a Hayley and George final 2. And, let's talk about why we think it's going to be a George and a Hayley final 2 here. I think Hayley wins at the end. I think she wins and she takes George to the end. I think even if George wins, he takes Hayley to the end. I think if Flick wins, she takes George to the end. I actually think that both of them, that they can beat George at this stage. But I'm very, very confident that Flick doesn't make the final, because I think Flick is more liked by the jury than both of them. I think Flick has got a better story as the underdog, someone that stayed, obviously, after something very sad happened with her family losing a mother, sadly, while she was out there. I think it's just a story that if it made the final, people would have felt obligated to vote Flick. And, she had to win some clutch wins here at the end to get to the final. I haven't seen the edit on Flick this season that will back a Flick win. And that's the biggest reason why I don't think Flick is going to win this next challenge, which, by the way, prior to talking about that, how gnarly does that final challenge look like? It looks like something straight out of JLP's dungeon that he's brought into this game.
Absolutely. I think they've gone, straight over to Wolf Creek and locked themselves up in Mick Taylor's dungeon there. It almost looks like there's a cage coming down on them with spikes at the end, it looked like, and it was just a really interesting final tribal. challenge there. I don't know if it reminds me of Survivor Thailand, where they had to have the coins between their fingers and they were in that lotus position, or if it reminds me more of Survivor Fiji in that final challenge where they were hanging from that rope and holding on for dear life, which Dreams won that one. And, you know, you had the whole truck gate happening there, but it really does look torturous. As Harry Wiggins says here, yeah, evil and torture. I would hate to be doing that. And certainly, you know, Australian Survivor always produces these great final immunity challenges. We saw in season 1, Christy and Lee battling it out all the way to the end. Christy collapsing at the end because she'd given so much of an effort. And this is what I like about Australian Survivor, having these endurance challenges in the game. We don't see that in US Survivor anymore, which is, you know, if I had to bring back one thing in US Survivor, other than the auction, it'd be the endurance challenges, whether it's hands on a hard idol or Bubba Buoy, or, you know, whatever it is, the hanging by a thread, as we saw in Survivor Fiji. We see at the end, you know, whoever wants to win the most is going to fight it out, fight through all the pain. Certainly, if you're Brian Lake in Champions vs Contenders, you might accidentally take your hat off and lose $500,000. But, you know, it's going to be a very brutal final immunity challenge, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how it plays out. You know, as you said there, Flick, who does she take if she wins individual immunity? Does she take George or does she take Hayley? I still think I'm leaning more towards her taking Hayley and really going that all women's alliance towards the end. Although
Hayley's betrayed her so many times. Hayley's betrayed her now for what, 4 or 5 votes in a row. Like, it actually became like the laughing thing. I just want to finish this. It became like the laughing thing of the episode from every time they talk about, oh, will we do this all women alliance? Because you just know it's never getting together. They're not going to do the all female alliance. So she got like betrayed week in and week out. But you're quite right. Flick might still see George as a bigger strategical threat going into the end here. But I think Flick beats both of them most likely at this point. I think she's got more friends on the jury.
I think that's the thing you've got to consider is who is the bigger threat and who is, you know, the weaker player, the one you take to the end. Because obviously Hayley has a massive mark against her in the fact that she was voted out and had to fight her way back through Redemption Rock. Which is, you know, a massive discredit that you can really focus on at Final Tribal Council and use that against her. Whereas on George's side, he hasn't really been very popular amongst camp. He's blindsided people many times, betrayed them many times. Obviously, if you look at it from one side, it's a great game. But if you look at it from another side, you know, like we saw with Russell in Survivor Samoa, you know, bad jury management can go back to bite you. So I think really everyone in the game has their cons and everyone has their pros. Obviously, Flick has a lot of the brawn jury there. She's won a lot of challenges, and, you know, she's become the underdog almost amongst these four brains at the end. She's been the last brawn standing and fought her way through. But then again, she hasn't been included in many votes. So when you look at the final 3, I think it's actually quite even. I really think any of the 3 could win at this stage. I would give credence to George and Hayley. I'd say they definitely nudge a little bit ahead of Flick because they've played, you know, such strong games and been very dominant strategically. But I do think it's an equal chance for any 3 of them.
Well, like Go Dave here says, it's not like Hayley and George hasn't combined to 95% of the confessionals this season. And then Alex Neo saying, yes, George has broken a record for confessional counts this Australian Survivor season. I think that's true. I read somewhere he's had more confessions than any of the previous big players like Dave Kennard or Luke Toki or any of those guys, which I'm not surprised because it has been the George and Hayley show for most of the season. We've pretty much thought the whole season that Hayley's probably winning this, and then we thought between George and Simon's the one that's going to make a deep run. George is probably going to get clipped just before the finale, and they had us on that one because we both thought there's just no way George can play this game and keep going. And another thing I want to address here is I did see here somewhere someone said that George can still win this. And so Zach, welcome to the live stream. I don't know if you've been with us live before, but we always love seeing new live people here in the stream as well, saying George can win here at the end. And I tell you what, the jury were, you could hear visibly like the shock when George wasn't voted out in this vote. Like they were all like, what, really? Cara's voted out, George was on the plate, or maybe it was because they were shocked that Hayley wasn't voted out. I don't know, but you could hear them being shocked that Cara was the one that went here in this specific spot. So I do think George does have an opportunity to make his case. What I'm really interested in, Riley, is we've seen George quit challenge after challenge or sit it out, thinking, I'm not doing this one. Will we see George pull a Richard Hatch here at the end and step down and say, you guys both have to take me to the finale to win because I've pissed off the most people?
Yeah, well, that's the question, and it depends. Is that a strategy he wants to take there? Certainly Flick and Hayley obviously being the two strongest players in the game. They've won the lion's share of immunity challenges, and George hasn't won any. Although I do think, George might see the back on his wall. He's back against the wall at this point in the game. I'm interested to know who Hayley will take in the end. Does she prefer to take Flick as being a brawn, or does she want to take George? She has said that she thinks that despite George thinking he can beat Hayley at the end, I think it's very much a Russell and Natalie scenario in this case, where George thinks he's playing such a dominant game, but Hayley has the scalp here. And I do actually think this is an interesting comparison to make between Survivor Samoa and Survivor Brains versus Brawn. Obviously, Alex brought it up there earlier that George has had more confessionals than any other castaway. And the player that ended up winning was Natalie White, who obviously beat Russell at the end of the game. So do we see this silent, under the radar female who's almost this, sidekick to George, at least towards the end of the game, take it out in the end and completely bamboozle the jury? The jury holds a lot of resentment towards George, and he's almost burnt for his decisions in the game.
I personally think we're going to see it. Like I'm ready for a George runner-up. I don't like, and listen, I would love for George to go and prove me wrong again here. But me personally, I think that Hayley's going to win this. I thought Hayley was going to win this season since week 1. I said she's got a winner's edit. There was 1 week they threw me off for week 2 that I wasn't too sure. But then straight after that, I've always been Hayley's the person, right? I just never knew how they were going to get there. And I never, ever in a million years thought that Hayley and George would be sitting next to each other at the end. Like to have and that's another thing that we should look at it, because, I was low on the season at certain points this season, like you would know, Riley, where I was just like, it's advantage overload. It's a really weird edit, but the end game, you're going to have to say, if Hayley and George both gets to the end, there's not been many times where you get a final 2 where you look at the final 2 and you say, hey, if Dom wins, I'm happy with that. If Wendell wins, I'm happy with that. If Yule wins, I'm happy with that. If Aussie wins, I'm happy with that. Those are probably the 2 that I can think of off the top of my head where the final... she was okay, but I mean, for me personally, I was a Yule or Aussie man that season. I thought they well deserved to be number 1 and 2 that season. I'm happy Yule ultimately won, and even more so as because I was quite young when I watched that the first time, watching it, I guess, live, I didn't have back then the same appreciation. Yule was my favorite that season. I don't know what I'm saying, but now I even appreciated that much more because I would always prefer the strategic game to win out against the physical game at the end. But I've got a feeling that the physical game is going to outwit or outplay the strategic game here, because I think if you look at the 2 players, if we put them next to each other, pound for pound going into this finale, George is by far the superior strategic player here. He's already voted her out once. He's already gotten the best of her once, right? And he's going to go to the final with her, but I think she's not a bad strategical player. And that's why I don't want to compare. I don't even think Natalie White is a bad strategical player. But to compare Natalie White, who isn't one of the best Survivor winners in the US, to someone like Hayley, I feel like it's an unfair comparison, because even though she was voted out in the game, and I know that counts against her, this is the rules that they were playing with this year, and they had the opportunity to vote her out before she gets to the end. So to me, she deserves a spot if she gets to the end. She's had to work for it, and she hasn't come back at the final 5 given with an idol given to her, at the end, and she hasn't. She's. I feel like the Edge, there's so much more wrong with the Edge compared to the way that Hayley gets to the end here. So if Hayley wins, I'll accept it. I'll be happy for her. I will see her as one of the better winners. I saw someone in our chat earlier saying that she would be a better winner than Pia and David Gannat. I don't agree with that, but she will be a good winner.
Yeah, I am obviously still rooting for Hayley. She was my preseason winner pick. So to see that come true after my embarrassment with Survivor South Africa would be great to see. And perhaps I can go back to back with Ricard on Survivor 41 and he wins as well. Who knows at this point? But certainly Channel Mud here saying that Hayley can say that she has saved George many times in the game. I think that is a very valid point that Hayley can bring up at Final Tribal Council. As Anthony says as well, I think Hayley's a triple threat. She's got strategy, social game, and great physical strength. George has one of those things. And I think you're referring to physical strength there, right, Anthony?
Yes.
But no, certainly George has, not competed in challenges. And I think that's going to be something that works against him. If, the jury really picks on him for that, a brawn jury as well, the likes of Danny and Andrew might say, well, you haven't given it your all, you haven't given 100%. You look at people in the jury like Wei and Cara, who, Wei has given up on times, but Cara certainly, despite being one of the weaker, and I say that loosely, members of the tribe, she hasn't given up at all. None of these people have given up. They've continued to fight all the way, whereas George has, sort of let it slide a little bit. He hasn't given it his all in those immunity challenges, which might work against him, I think.
Now, I agree with Go Dave here. He says that George was because I actually had a chat with another fan prior to coming live here who compared George to Russell as well. And I said to him, do you see Russell like midway in an immunity challenge going back and helping someone else? I just don't see that happening. I don't think George is at that level when it comes to talking to others within the camp. And I do feel like there's going to be a lot of hurt feelings about George outplaying people in the game. But I just don't see it. But I do agree with you on the jury assessment, Riley. We do have a lot of casual people playing this season. They're not really super fans. There's a lot of recruits playing this season potentially here that may not respect the strategy over other aspects of the game, like you said, such as winning and being a physical threat in the game and sort of winning those immunity wins and things like that. Winning their way, I think in Hayley's favor, it will count in Hayley's favor that she had to win her way back in the game. And I think people look at that as a plus with this jury, opposed to your sort of traditional super fans of the show, people who want to see old school Survivor, where if you get voted out, that counts against you. I don't think that's going to be the case with this jury at all. And I think, like for me, like I said, if Hayley wins, hats off to her. She wins, she deserves it. I would still think she's a great winner. But the question to you, Riley, and you didn't answer this, you tried to sort of slide past it. Is she a better winner than Pia and David Gannett, like some people in the chat believe, if she does take the win out here?
I didn't avoid it. I just got carried away on a tangent. No, I don't think so. I think Pia Miranda still, in my mind, is the greatest winner. I suppose this brings us to Dale's comment earlier here. How would you rank this final three with the rest in Survivor Australia? It's definitely a top tier final three. And in my mind, I think it rivals Pia Miranda's season, Champions vs Contenders too. Obviously you had Pia, Baden and Harry in that instance. This season you have Flick, George and Hayley in the final three. I don't mean to write Baden off because obviously he's a friend in the podcast, but he was a little bit of a non-factor in the final three when you compare it to the other three. Although I suppose you could also say the same about Flick. Obviously, George and Hayley, two extremely strong players, top tier players. And Baden certainly played a great game, just as Flick has. So I'd certainly say it's probably top two Australian Survivor final threes. I'm not sure how I can compare it just yet. And I suppose I'll have to wait and see, pass my judgment once we actually see how the final three plays out, who votes out who, and what happens towards the end there. But I certainly think it's up there.
No, 100%. And I do want to address here, Timo says that George not competing has got him to final three by not being a physical threat. Very clever. I personally don't think it's a strategy. I'm going to put that on the limb. I think he just hasn't won some of these. I think he may have thrown one or two challenges here or there, but I don't think he went into this thinking, hey, I'm going to throw as many challenges as I can so people just don't see me as a threat. But definitely, I don't agree with you, Timo, that it has counted in his favor. It's just, was that a deliberate strategy or not? I don't know. I don't know if he's the Dr. Will Kirby of Australian Survivor as of yet. And then also here, another one, I did see someone say that George here, Anthony says, had an atrocious social game, yelling out insults while voting people out onto the juries. Very bad jury management. And he was a little bit hard on Emmett when he voted Emmett out. And I don't know if that was necessary. So he does bring up a good point there. I think that George is sometimes, I think he's a good guy, but I also think that he likes theater and being the life of the show. And I think maybe he did go a little bit far there because Emmett is someone, Riley, that is quite liked by the rest of the people there on the jury. So I think Emmett could still very much influence where votes goes at the end because he was somewhat of a leader within that Brawns group. Or the Brawns group.
I don't think it's only Emmett. I think it's overall the whole jury. Certainly, players like Danny, Andrew, they've all been hurt by George. I certainly don't think he's played a bitter game, but he certainly hasn't played a warm game either. He's, somewhere in the middle towards, playing a good social game and a terrible social game. I'd say he's probably more towards the terrible end, but certainly not at as far as the Russell level is. But, certainly for George, if he wins in the final three, it's going to be just amazing. His journey from day one, back against the wall, all the way through day 48 has been so sensational to see. And I'm really looking forward to seeing how next week plays out.
100%. Just addressing this one here quickly from Alex. He's said a few times here, it's funny how Andrew is considered a brawn, and it is quite funny because I feel like Andrew probably is more of a brawn than a brain, even the way he played the game, to be honest. He obviously being a survival expert and knowing his way around being out there is probably where the brains aspect came into it, because he had more knowledge than others. But I do think sometimes when Survivor producers have got a theme and they've got people they want to cast, they will kind of stretch it, similar to like Game Changers, where people suddenly became game changers, where you look at them and you're like, really? You're a game changer? And I think that probably happened with a couple of players here as well. Like Hayley, for me, is another person that I could very easily see as a brawn. She's definitely a brain as well. She could even be a beauty. She falls into all three of those categories if you really want to put it out there. But she ended up being a brain. It's not that I'm saying she's not smart. I mean, she did win the puzzle in this one of the 2 episodes here as well. But let's get into the end game part here and have a look at our draft teams now that we're getting to the end as well. And guys, as we get into our draft teams here, if you've got any last questions that you would like us to address, this is going to be the optimal time to do that, and we will look into that shortly for you. So we had 5 players coming into the end game here, Riley. I had 2 players left. You had 3 players. It has actually been pretty tight getting into the pointy end of the game. I ended up losing Way here, leaving me with the lone man, George, in the game here, and you ended up losing Cara. So even going here into the finale, we still both have players left in the game, which is great to see. You've got your first pick and overall winner, preseason winner pick, Hayley. I tell you what, if Hayley does win this, mate, you need to put it all on black that weekend, because clearly you've got some luck on your side. And Flick, who I believe was your number 2 girl pick, so you had the number 1 and number 2 girl pick, make it all the way to the end. And then, I wish I could say, George, I had you as my preseason winner pick, I had you as my number 1 guy pick, but George is kind of mid-table for me when I picked him, but he's been really consistent throughout the season. And, I guess before we go into sort of what I think we've gone a lot into what we think is going to happen next week, I do want to ask, you bring up the whole question here that if, George does not win this, and I've got a feeling he's the runner-up. I really have that feeling, and I'd love to be wrong. Not that I would hate for Hayley to win. Like I said, I look at Hayley and George like I looked at Dom and Wendell. Like I would have been happy either way. Maybe I slightly wanted Dom to win that season. He didn't end up winning.
Agreed.
And maybe I slightly want George to win this season. He might not win it, but it's definitely not because I don't think Hayley will do great. And we'll have an off season. I think it's unfair to look at a game right now and say, yes, she's definitely not better than some of the other winners. But I think that we probably in our off-season content want to rank all of the winners and objectively look at their games again from the beginning to the end and make that sort of decision. But if we had to on the spot look at George's game, you mentioned a couple of people there that he could rival. In my opinion, Luke Toki is the best player to never have won Australian Survivor. And I've got to say, I'm a massive, massive Luke Toki fan. Like, it doesn't get bigger than that, for me personally. And I still think Luke Toki is my most lovable character. It's going to be a tough off-season podcast when we start comparing both their games. I think that George makes a very strong case to be seen as the best player to never win if he doesn't win this season. And I don't know if recency bias is coming into it. It could be. But Riley, how big of a Luke Toki fan I am, so it'll be a tough conversation when that comes up.
Yeah, absolutely. And it has been a very scrappy season for George. I'd probably still give the angle to Luke, but I'd say it is very 50-50 at the moment. And it all comes down to what happens at the final 3. Certainly, I would be worried about the Australian Survivor fan base. We've seen how bitter they can be at times. Certainly how they reacted to Luke Toki being voted out in Champions vs. Contenders 2. I hope it doesn't get as ugly as that. And people actually respect Hayley as a winner if she does go on to win, or Flick as a winner if she does go on to win. If George goes on to lose, I think, we can see, and I do liken him to Russell just because I think that's the reason why he loses in the end is poor jury management. Certainly don't think he's, as terrible a player as Russell was, and not that Russell was terrible, but not as bitter of a player as Russell was. But I do think that's where his game sort of falls back. In that, he hasn't been competing in the challenges. He hasn't managed the jury well. And he has been fighting since day one, but he has had a lot of things working against him throughout the season that I can see why Hayley potentially wins over him. But it will be really interesting. Obviously, 1 episode to go airing this Sunday, the finale of Australian Survivor Brains vs. Brawn. This season is absolutely flown by. And, we have been critical of it on the podcast, discussing all the twists that have potentially negatively affected the season. But I don't think we could have asked for a better final three than this. And it's going to be such a great finale episode that I'm really looking forward to seeing it and to see who comes out on top.
100%. So Go Dave here, just reading through the last minute questions on the podcast. Go Dave says that he thinks there is a difference between Russell and George, and that Russell made it a part of his strategy to treat people miserably in the beginning of the game. And that was kind of what he was doing. And Russell just didn't think that it would affect his chances to win at the end game. Obviously, famously, Russell never really watched any Survivor prior to playing the first time. So that sort of caught up to him at the end as well. Then also here, Channel Mud says that he thinks Riley has it in the bag. So I'm assuming that Channel Mud does think Flick does win the season here at the end. Channel Mud,
Hayley,
well done on choosing.
Hayley or Flick.
I'm sure Mud thinks Flick's winning. So also Dale here says that this is a completely random question, but do you think Hayley's game is what Sean thought she was playing in All Stars? It's random, I know, but both played in the middle. What do you think of that one? Do you think that, because you mentioned Sean is one of the better players to never win, it's quite interesting because I've spoken to a few people that played the season with Sean off air who thought that Sean would never win even if she played again. They say that she's too flaky when she plays.
Yeah, I think I was probably more referring to Sean's game in the first Champions vs Contenders season. I think, as you say, she is a little bit of a flaky player. She does piss off a lot of people and a little bit messy at times, and she can never make her case at Final Tribal Council. So I don't think Sean will ever win. I think Hayley's game, as Dale says here, it is a very good game at playing the middle and, really fighting from the bottom. I think she's played a great game. I'd almost say it's, more unique and more in-depth than Sean's game was. I have criticized Hayley for, flipping more towards George's side toward the end of the game here, but it certainly has paid off well for her because I think, in a final two, George is probably the only person she can beat at this point. Had she gone against, a Cara away, a Flick, or a Danny, I think they all could have won. Whereas I think, while George and Hayley are extremely close, they both have a lot riding against them, but they played very similar games that I think, Hayley probably has the little bit extra on him that she might be able to pull out the $500,000 prize.
Okay, well, Marcus here just says Chris Cara confirmed on her jury villa regards to the jury shocked that Hayley was behind the vote, and that's why everyone was shocked when Cara went. So I saw somewhere in jury villa, everybody thought that it was because Hayley was saved that everybody was shocked, not because George is still in the game. So it's good to know because obviously Hayley must be a favorite here going into the end. Timo says that he's very happy to see George's political career taking off from here. I am definitely very, very happy to see where that goes as well, especially since, if he becomes prime minister, he's not the prime minister of my country, Riley. He's going to be the prime minister of your country moving forward. So I'm more than happy with that.
Fan of me as well. So I might have to move to New Zealand because, we know I was very critical of him in the preseason. So I might be one of his first enemies. But hopefully me talking highly of George in this episode has maybe redeemed me a little bit. Please, George, please tell me I'm in Nickel Books now.
Also here, Alex says happy for either George or Hayley to win. Don't consider Flick as an underdog, and I think that there was a real missed opportunity here by the editors this season, Riley. If they gave us more Flick content throughout the season and they made us like Flick earlier in the season and they didn't just sort of purple her at certain times within the game because she had a strong start. Remember in the beginning you were thinking she could be the winner? I feel like the Australian Survivor editors just didn't have enough red herrings for us this season to make us think someone else could still win it. I feel like they missed an opportunity for us to feel more like she is an underdog towards the end here because she's got the perfect story. She's winning challenges when she needs to stay in the game. To me, she is an underdog, but that storyline only developed 1 or 2 episodes ago.
Yeah, I think George has probably been the red herring this season. Certainly, it is still very close between those two, as we've said time and time again. But George, every week, it was going to be the week he was blindsided and he's fought his way through. So I have really liked how the editing has actually played out in the end. I'm still critical of the fact that, it's 90% George, Hayley, Simon, Emmett, and Flick on this season. But certainly, when you look at George's over-the-top edit from week 1, he really has been the star of the show this season, regardless of whether he wins or not. I think, he's definitely, a great character to have, and I'm sure he'll prove very popular with the fans as well.
No, 100%. So, Riley, I think that's pretty much it, unless there's anything else that you want to bring up around regards to these 2 episodes. It was pretty straightforward. It's exciting. Like you said, we will be back next week on Monday evening at 7 p.m. So, the day after the finale to talk about everything in that finale. And then after that, we will still have Survivor South Africa finale. That will be the week after that. Basically, we've got a Survivor South Africa recap that I'm hoping, Riley, you'll be a part of this weekend on Saturday. And we've got some off-season content that will probably follow 2 or 3 weeks after that. We'll take a bit of a break here from the Survivor Worldwide coverage when both the seasons finish, and then come back with some great off-season content. If you want to be a part of the community and you want to sort of put suggestions forward to us in regards to what type of content would you like to see in the off-season, please jump onto our Discord channel. We'll make sure to put that in the description below after this live. So come back and check the description to see what that Discord link is and join a part of that community. Let us know what you'd like to see. We've got a bunch of cool ideas in regards to what we want to do, and potentially we want to get some of the fans involved, maybe do a podcast or two with some fans on here as well. Once again, also, Dave here says thanks for the stream, and we want to thank everybody that has been with us as well on the stream. We always enjoyed the live crowd. It's so much more fun when you guys come along for the ride and you ask us great questions as we do it as well. Riley, I do want to go over to you. Your other channel, Snuffed, what's coming up on that over the next week?
Yeah, well, this week we'll have how Sandra Diaz Twine won again in Survivor Heroes versus Villains coming up. Also, straight after the finale on Sunday night, I'll be putting up my Australian Survivor season review. So certainly if you want to check that out, head on over to my channel. And, once we find out who the winner is, I'll also be doing a winner recap for them as well. So whether that's how Hayley Leak won, how Flick Palmatier won, or how George Mladenov won. We'll have to wait and see, who takes out the crown on Soul Survivor. Certainly, if you haven't already, obviously subscribe here on Reality Pop. We appreciate each and every one of you. I'll be doing some content with the Survivor buffs in the lead up to Survivor 41. We have a very special episode, a very special Survivor 41 preview coming up with the likes of Peridium, Idled Out, myself, obviously Adam and Gideon from the Survivor buffs, and also Alexa and Phil from the Survivor specialists. So keep an eye out and, stay tuned to Reality Pop, because Australian Survivor might be ending, but certainly we've got another week to go in Survivor South Africa as well. And Survivor 41 obviously coming up. So I've said it many times, Chris, but we started Survivor South Africa in June, and then obviously we've had Australian Survivor on top of that. And Survivor 41 is going to take us all the way through until Christmas. So I'm going to be absolutely exhausted by the time Santa comes down the chimney. So, it's going to be a crazy couple of weeks ahead as we enter the end game of Australian Survivor South Africa, and, the start of a new US Survivor season as well. It's great fun.
Yeah, 100%. And again, it's always so much fun to have you guys on here with us as well. It's so much fun, even though we get tired of all the content we've got to do. Loving it at the moment. I've also got the challenge that I'm recapping at the moment. So if you watch the challenge, look out for that as well. Every Saturday morning around 10 a.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time, we talk about the latest challenge episode as well. And, if you guys really enjoy this content, if you like what I'm doing with the Survivor South Africa interviews for people that played in this season, go out on Twitter, follow me on Twitter as well at Chris Swanepoel, all one word. It should be in the link. 2, I believe, is the number after that. I might have to look and see if I can change that handle, but that is still the handle for now. And tag me in it, tag King George in it, tag everybody that is currently playing this Australian Survivor season and say, hey, we've listened to Reality Pop. We really enjoy their podcast. We want you to come on there and do an interview with Chris and with Riley. We would love to have George on here. We would love to have Hayley on here. We would love to have anybody from the season that you guys want to have us do interviews with, and hopefully we can get some great off-season content and do some deep dives into some of these players' games as well. So go tweet at them, let them know that you want to hear a little bit about them, and we'll do it live so you guys can jump on here as well and ask them questions as we interview them. So it'll be really interactive as well if we can get some of those guys to come on. Once again, guys, thank you very much for your support. Thank you for watching this live, and we will talk to you next time after the finale. Goodbye.
Bye.